So, Javi, what have we got today to start?
Yeah, so as I mentioned last week, we will have a new release by the time that this podcast is released, which is early in the week, next week. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and we do have some notes on what those releases and bugs and things of that nature will be. Do you want to go through a couple of those?
Yeah, so the full release notes, talking is hard, will be on the blog. But just a few kind of to mention are a few of our users had an issue in their quick add. It was relatively kind of focused on just a few of our newer users. Mm-hmm. They're unable to schedule jobs in the quick add, so that's been resolved. Another big one for our hybrid 5 and 6 users, those who kind of bounce back and forth between the software. Canceling jobs in 5, the job notifications, and we talked about this on one of our earlier podcasts, the job notifications weren't being disabled in 6. Right. They weren't communicating that process. And so that has been resolved. So any of our hybrid users, that's definitely a big one that I think they'll be thankful that that's working that way. And then these last two will be huge for a lot of users. So if you're listening, definitely tune into this part. There were 2 issues on our grid list. So one of them has been kind of an ongoing thing that we've heard from a lot of our users on, and one of them is more recent. And so I'll start with that one. You were unable to resize the columns. So on our account list, order list, job list, when you try to resize the columns, there would be like some pushback there. And it wouldn't hold that when you would move from page to page. So that has been resolved. Whatever width you set those columns at, it'll actually remember that. It'll save that next time you log in. It'll remember that. It's all tied to you as a user.
Yeah, it's just like kind of think of it as like an over glorified Excel sheet.
Right.
And it'll actually stay sticky this time.
Yep. And the really big part, which has been requested a lot throughout my time here and even before, on any of those grid lists, you have the ability to choose different columns. So it has kind of like a preset list of anywhere from 6 to 8 columns that are on there.
Yeah.
But we have a whole slew of data that can be included if you need to see it for your particular use. Well, now whatever you choose in that columns list, it'll actually stay permanently when you log in or log out. Because right now it stays permanently until you log out, and then the system refreshes to what the defaults were to kind of improve like the query times and other things like that.
Yeah.
But they've done a ton of work on it. The devs have done a great job. And so now when you choose those columns, whatever your custom viewpoint is going to be, it'll save that. And so the next time you join into that order list, account list, etc., it'll remember that.
This is really big because different companies, even if they're in the exact same industry, want to see different things first on the list, like an account memo or whatever. So this will change the game for a lot of people if you know how to use it. And if you don't, ServiceMonster.net/onboarding.
Yeah. We'll include a quick little video when this comes out.
You don't want them to call you? I'll give you Adam's personal phone number right now and
start calling after hours.
Yeah, 3 a.m. This is Jake from State Farm.
But as I mentioned, those are just kind of 4 of the larger ones to take note. The full release notes will be on the blog. So go ahead and take a look at that.
Yeah, now moving on to SMUG. We have some good stuff this week. Dan asked about creating a whole new order group called the Rework, and thought this might be a good time to kind of go through some of the best practices for in the system, and like because we don't want it to affect the order averages and things of that nature when something does need to be reworked.
Yeah. So Dan was listening to one of our other podcasts where we kind of talked about this and the different job types you could use. And so when you do have a scenario where rework is involved, you want to make sure that that's tracked properly so that it's not, affecting, you don't think that job is revenue building. And so you can make sure that your technicians are trained properly if there's one that seems to be having more rework than others, right?
Okay.
And what Dan brought up was that he thought it might work best if there's a whole new order type that was just called rework.
Right.
And so what I kind of wanted to do is just kind of show what Joe talked about and why the system is built this way. Because the idea is that you would just take the invoice that you recently completed,
Right.
and you would just schedule another job against it and label it as rework. That way they know what they did last time. They have all the information there. And then you can include fresh new job notes for that particular job of what needs to be reworked, what the issue was, make sure that the customer is satisfied and all those notes. But it's not going to create a new order, because if you create a new order, your dashboard's going to be off slightly.
Yeah.
It's gonna like lower your average because your new order is there's no actual revenue there.
And you may not even notice it if you have a lot of invoices. It may not bring down that average, but it will make a difference if the beginning of the month or whatever. Like you'll notice it right away. So right now the order types are estimate, work order, invoice, and voided, if you didn't know. And so he was asking for a whole new one, right? Like rework.
And so, they really just wanted to kind of explain like why the reasoning is the way that it is. And then also one of the other users in SMUG kind of chimed in, and her thought was, exactly what I just mentioned. Like, well, we just create a whole new order and then we just kind of invoice it out at $0. And that's just kind of, if you do that, is it going to be the end of the world?
Probably not.
No. But it will lower your average invoice, and it's going to just kind of take some of those KPIs and affect them. And the whole point is we want to have the data as clean and is an honest representation of what's happening as possible.
Exactly.
And plus, you want to make sure your technicians know exactly what happened last time. If it's a different tech, they would want to see everything that guy did on the previous order,
or pictures and
or exactly.
Notes. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Good answer, man.
Is this Family Feud? Good answer.
Good answer. Yeah.
Yeah, good answer.
And the board says
top 5 answers on the board.
Right. Scott was asking, can you, here's like a tongue twister, can you give one ticket or invoice to appointments with a separate technician from the mobile app? So I can set a quote for myself and the job time for each tech. Thought it would be good training, to our listeners, having that ability to schedule multiple jobs on any order from the app specifically.
Yeah. So this is just kind of one of those quick kind of feature training notes, is that in our system, orders and jobs are separated. And for a lot of you, that it isn't always clear if your process is generally one job per order. They seem like they're just all kind of connected. But every order, you can have multiple jobs. You can assign it to multiple routes on your schedule, so you can have multiple technicians working in it.
Right.
And on the desktop app, on the Quick Add, you can schedule as many jobs against an order as you want right there all on one screen.
It's super simple. It's easy. Yep. You have a lot of real estate on the screen to play with.
Yep. And even if you don't use the Quick Add, you can still schedule as many jobs against that. You can do one-off jobs that, again, like the rework scenario. Or in this scenario, you can have one job for the estimate first, and then a week later, you have the other job for the actual work to get done. So just kind of one of those things that's nice to point out, whether you're using it for the mobile app or just wanting to have those blocked off on your schedule, making sure that you have all of your bases covered.
Right. Makes sense. And Tim asked, I don't have a process in place for tracking my employees' time on a job. Does anyone have a good system down? Maybe use a ServiceMonster or another program. Looking for ideas.
Yeah, so I always like to point out kind of these collaboration posts. It's one of my favorite things to see in SMUG is when the various business owners are kind of asking each other for tips that they might have on their own. And in this particular one, it got brought up, a couple of different companies. Life 360 was one that got mentioned, where that one's a little bit more in depth about kind of keeping track of GPS at all times on their company phones. The reason we can't have that set up on is because it's a personal phone. Generally, the apps can be downloaded on, so it creates issues as far as what's allowed, as far as like the tracking goes. But there is that possibility. And then you have the ability to check in and check out on the technician app. One of the worries of there is if they forget or things like that, if they do forget and they're honest, you can go in and edit that manually if you're an admin or a manager user on the schedule. So you if that does come up, you do have that ability, but you want to make sure you train kind of the SOP process, because I'm sure you guys have SOPs, right? But the SOP process can just be like when you're on the job, you check in, and it's really hard to not check out. It's part of that ending checklist. If you just go through the list at the end of it, like you're checking out every time.
Yeah, you can't miss it if you're doing it right. Yep.
So yeah, thanks as always to our SMUG users for their collaboration with each other. Until next time, hope everyone has a great week.